Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we take the next step in a journey that we all started yesterday, a couple hours before this time, with 90 other of your ex-best friends. In this stage, I'm going to tell you about the events that occurred in our city. They started Thursday night, June 22nd, 2023, at Rosemont Apartments. Now those apartments, some of you may be familiar with them. They sit and structured in the South Patrol sector, the way SAPD has the city broken down. And I expect over the course of this trial, you're going to hear that at about 12:33 Thursday the 22nd, SAPD got one or two 911 calls. There had been a disturbance at the Rosemont Apartments. The fire alarms were going off. There had been some damage. Somebody had cut them. SAPD officers responded. Before then, SA Fire got there. I forget the engine number, but I know the captain in charge, you'll hear from him, then Lieutenant Chris Hudson. And the fire team, they took effort to reduce the noise abatement and turned off. And they also met a person you're going to hear about. They met Miss Melissa Perez at their apartment. She lived there. They lived in apartment 202. They talked to her from the time they arrived up until the first SAPD officer arrived. And I suspect you'll learn that this was SAP Officer Jesus Rojas. He arrived on scene about, I think, 12:49 p.m. By the time Officer Rojas got there, the fire department had ceased the noise. Yes, they cut the power. And Officer Rojas also engaged with Ms. Perez. As he talked to her, he listened. He's had training. He knows what answers cue some things. And he asked her, "Hey, could you come over to my unit? We want to talk to you more." Miss Perez asked him, you'll hear, "You going to arrest me?" He said, "No." And she stood there. She had a little dog. And while she's waiting for Officer Rojas to get himself together to ask the question she wanted, another officer, an Officer Ramos, comes up and approaches the two of them. It's normal procedure. Every officer always has backup. And Miss Perez, seeing that, knowing the state, she decided to go back to her apartment. You'll hear and learn that she got into her apartment, and yes, the officers were pursuing, at before 1 a.m. on now Friday, June 23rd. Over the next 15 to 20 minutes, Officer Rojas went back to do his research. Officer Ramos stayed at her door. And you'll hear he kicked at the door, banged at the door, come out at the door, come out at the door, come out at the door, banging at the door, kicking at the door, banging at the door. For all those 20 minutes. Eventually, he's rejoined by Officer Rojas, and they were joined by a third officer, Officer Jonathan Salinas, and I believe you will hear from him today. Now, Officer Salinas, he was the senior officer of Sector 34 within the South Patrol District, which is where the Rosemont Apartments were. and it was normal in his protocol, Officer Salinas, since it occurred in his sector, he took control of the situation from Rojas and Ramos, and they became his backup. And over the next 15 minutes after Salinas arrived, the officers continued to talk. The way the apartment is set up, you approach it from the cul-de-sac in the grass, and you run down this alleyway to the door to the apartment. But that front living room, you walk past it, there's a wall between you and the alleyway. If you've lived in apartments, you can kind of understand it. And in the front, right about out here in the open area, there's a little patio, fenced off. And the front living room is visible from that patio area. And again, this was June 23rd in San Antonio. Even at midnight, it's kind of warm. So Ms. Perez, she had her windows open, screens open, lights on, and yes. And eventually she sat on her living room couch, and the officers could see her, and they engaged. Melissa, come out. You will hear, and the evidence will show. She said, nope. Come out. Nope. Officer Rojas, expect he will hear you. He suspected that he needed to ED Ms. Perez, or write it up as a suspect report. Officer Salinas, when he got over and he took over, he went and tried to call in and research. Is cut fire alarms, is that an arson thing? How do we handle this? Needing guidance. You'll hear that at approximately 1:33, Officer Salinas, the officer in charge, comes back and he tells his other two officers, we're done. We're just going to write it up. If she comes out, arrest her. But we're going to write it up. Salinas goes to his unit, checks for guidance from higher downtown. You'll hear from a detective, Michael Thornton, who was the detective at night CID, on duty that night, took a call from Salinas. And you'll learn that at that stage, 48 minutes after Miss Perez had gone into her home, you were told, write it up. List her name, suspect report. We don't know the exact amount of damage. Get back in service. And ultimately, at approximately 1:22 a.m., 50 minutes after the initial encounter, that's exactly what Salinas came back to Ramos and Rojas and said, "That's it, it's over." And all three officers turned off their body cam. Case was closed, going to be written up. Let's get back to work. And as they retreated back to their units, back to the parking lot, officers Salinas and Rojas, they encountered the maintenance man for the apartment complex. And with that, he gave them an estimate to the damage to the fire alarm. And I suspect the evidence will show when Officer Salinas got that estimate and got that damage, he talked to his sergeant in charge that day. The sergeant that night for Sector 34 was then SAPD Sergeant Flores. That at approximately 1:36 a.m., Salinas spoke to the other two officers, and 1:36 was 64 minutes after the initial call, after they closed it out. So I talked to Sarge. We can go in. Go into that patio, go into that front screen. And they turn their body cams on, they go back. And first they patrolled around the apartments. It's a 3-bedroom apartment. You have the living room behind the patio. You have a guest bedroom. You have another guest bedroom. I suspect you'll learn that in the second guest bedroom, Ms. Perez has a set of bunk beds. And then finally, if you go around the corner, you get to the master bedroom here in the back. And the evidence will show that Officer Salinas himself, probably 66, 67 minutes after the call, he's flashing his light into the apartment. Melissa, let us in. She said, nope. He comes back, he talks to his fellow officers. Yeah, she's in bed. He's retreated. At about 1:40, they continued to ask, Melissa, open up, come out, let us in. She said no. She says no. They go back and they kick on the door. Officer Salinas, he got real creative. He turned and hit the mule kick. I counted about 13 of them. And Ramos, he continued his front leg burst onto the door. I suspect you'll hear and you'll learn, and all these officers, and they are amongst anyone who wears the uniform to serve. They are amongst our city's finest. Young, vigorous, it's what you want in an officer. I believe you'll find and you'll hear that Melissa Perez was 50 years old, 5'1", 150 pounds. And in that state, after those 68 minutes, and again, Melissa's alternately sitting in the living room couch, looking out her bay window into that area. The officer's talking to her. She's saying nope. At one point, she drifts back into her room, and Officer Salinas jumps the rail, reaches into her window, tears the screen to reach in to try to unlock that door. And after all those kicks, in 68 minutes, 1 hour, 10 seconds, all the refusals to hear her, yes, Melissa Perez, she got up and she picked up an object, a hammer, resembles this, and she runs at the window of her apartment. Officer Salinas backs up, he retreats. And Melissa, after she hit the window screen, she knocked the frame off from the inside. She puts the hammer down because Officer Salinas had backed up and retreated. And she had one of those Jesus candles you see in HEB. And she threw it out the window, hit Officer Salinas on his elbow. You'll hear and learn that creates what the police call an E-tone. Officer's been hit, officer is in need of assistance, and that goes out throughout the district. It's essential, it's needed. Anytime any officer is down, brother and sister officers absolutely come rushing to the aid. You don't know what it is. That call went out at about 1:40, 68 minutes. You'll learn and you hear as officers are rushing to it that also Officer Salinas himself said, "I'm okay, slow it down, I'm all right. No emergency." And in the reaction, then Officers Villalobos and Officers Alejandro, they're part of the response. Ultimately, up to 15 uniformed patrol officers all responded. They're all standing around that open bay window. Multiples flashing light. You'll hear that 3 or 4 of them, Melissa had a guest. A homeless man, Santos Rios. You will hear that she gave him a place to lay his head. A bed. I suspect, I don't know, I can't prove it, she shared whatever she had with him. Officers were aware he was there. In fact, Officers Rojas, Ramos, they'd engaged him. "Hey, can you open the door? Can you let us in?" Over the course of time, once Sergeant Flores got there and he gets briefed from Officer Salinas, Officer Villalobos, he's an ex-Marine as I understand. And it doesn't surprise me because Marines lead from the front. He got his briefing, he moved to the front, he moved to the rail. "Can you talk to me?" Ms. Perez said no. He had persisted. And he took it on himself. "I think I can get that door open again." And he jumps the rail. And he tries to reach in. And he has some success. And same time, see that reaching in? And Melissa, yep, she picked that hammer up. And officers called off. And Officer Villalobos, he backed up, he retreated. You'll hear that the doors to the patio, the hinges are on the outside. I'm not a handyman myself, but that means that that door swings out into the patio. So Officer Villalobos put his right foot and his weight. I don't know, as he and I have passed each other these hearings, he appears to be about my height, 6'1", 6'2", good sturdy guy. And he held his foot there. So, "She ain't coming out. I'm good." Other officers are, no, come on, get over here, get over here, get over here. He said, I can get it, I can reach it. Because he backed off, Melissa put that hammer down. In fact, the evidence will show that between Officer Villalobos, Officer Alejandro, because of the patrol officers, he was kind of senior. He was working his way up to SWAT. He had been a high performer, the kind that we want to reward. And he's calling Villalobos, get back, now. Officer Villalobos, yeah, he did, because he was a younger officer in service. And he jumped back over the rail, and I believe the evidence will show from recorded on his camera, he says, I don't give a damn about the hammer. I'm 6'2". I'm a hard charger. It doesn't concern me. I can handle it. While all this is going on, officers still surround, and some are catching up. Hey, I start vacation after the shift is over with. How have you been? Some concept, something called a plan is formed. You'll hear from an officer, Andrew Chernick. Officer Chernick is a 20-year cop. He's been a detective in other instances, but he was a patrol officer here. Because the plan was to repeat Officer Villalobos and Officer Salinas' attempts to go over the rail in front of Ms. Perez, who can see it coming, and try to unlock the front door. And this is about 78 minutes after the damage. And you'll hear from Officer Andrew Chernick, who comes up to Sergeant Flores, because once the senior officer gets on the scene, he's the man in charge. And Officer Chernick comes up to Sergeant Flores and says, Sergeant, I think we're thinking about this wrong. She's sitting right there watching us coming through the front. I can go into the back. And while you're talking to her in the front, we can come in with less lethal tasers. But the supervisor in charge, nope, he rejected that. And ultimately, at 2:02 a.m., a plan was hatched together. Officer Villalobos' partner, and Officer Travis Thompson, you'll hear from him, and Officer Alejandro, to engage and talk to and keep Ms. Perez talking at the front window, while Officer Villalobos and Sergeant Flores would also climb that rail and go right back to that same window and door to try to enter. You'll hear it's been twice. You reach into the apartment, Melissa reacts. You back up, she backs up. But they came in the third time. Only this time, officers responded to that pattern with deadly force. You'll hear that ultimately that door had not been unlocked, that they had to kick it in themselves to get in to start first aid. And ultimately, before 3 a.m., Melissa Perez was declared deceased. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is the gravamen of what the evidence is for the case that we bring here today. But I don't think that will be all you will come to learn. I suspect you also hear from a Daisy Nieto. She was someone that Melissa Perez referred to as my sister. You may learn that opening her home to a homeless man was not unusual for Ms. Perez. The reason she herself had that 3-bedroom was that she had 4 lights in her life. Her daughter Alexis, her sons Jaden and Aiden, and the brightest star, her youngest child Dylan. Those extra bedrooms were for them when they came. You'll learn that over time, I suspect you'll hear the negative evidence that there is no one that says Melissa Perez gave consent to enter her home. No one will say they had reason to believe Melissa Perez was destroying evidence. You'll hear that no one had reason to believe that Melissa Perez could escape out the back door of that apartment that did not exist when 15 of SAPD's finest are watching her and got eyes on her for 2 hours and 30 minutes. You'll also hear that none of those 15 officers thought that after 78, 2 hours and 30 minutes, no one thought about doing the constitutionally mandated thing of going to a neutral and detached magistrate and getting a warrant to breach Ms. Perez's home. It wasn't a consideration. You'll learn that this repeated pattern over and over and over again. Yes, SAPD, all police officers, their duty, their obligation is to protect us. We don't want them letting violent criminals flee. But you'll hear when again the officers on the ground think to write it up, maybe we need to EDIR, maybe we need to do something else. What you will not hear is a justification to not comply with Texas law, their training and policy. At the end of all the evidence, we expect you will have evidence of the who that did what shot and killed or shot at Melissa and Perez. To whom? Melissa and Perez. At apartment 202 of the Rosemont Apartments in the early morning hours of Friday, April 23rd, 2023, you will have the who that did what, to whom, when they did it, where they did it, how they did it. Such that at that time, Mr. Lunan, Mr. Escobar, and myself, we're going to respond right back here to the spot, and we're going to ask you for your verdict of guilty on each and every count of every indictment. Let's get started.
May I proceed, Judge?
Yes.
They had a right to go home to their families. They had a right to go home to their wives. They had a right to go home to their children. They had a right not to be a victim. They had a right not to have June 23rd, 2023 be the end of any of their watches. They had that right. And what I just heard in that opening statement, I won't have enough time to go through. Because when you heard them read the indictment, you heard them read the indictment for Alfred, and you heard them read honor about it, honor about it, honor about it, honor about it. It seemed like he must have shot 15 people. They were referring to one incident, one split-second decision that he had to make to go home to his family. When they read it for Eleazar, honor about, honor about, honor about, honor about. One split-second instant that happened at the same time Alfred did. And he had to make a decision to go home to his family. And when you read honor about, that's a split-second decision that Nathaniel had to make to go home to his family. Because that is the promise that every officer makes to their family, is that I'm not going to do anything to not come home to you guys tonight. I'm going to make sure I'm safe. And not only am I going to make sure I'm safe, I'm going to make sure he's safe. I'm going to make sure he's safe. I'm going to make sure all of us are safe. What did that prosecutor do? I've never seen somebody justify a woman running at a person with a hammer and go, well, I mean, they should have just backed up. They should have backed off. I've never seen it. I've never seen it. Here's what happened. Melissa Perez cut a fire alarm at an apartment complex with hundreds of people who live there. The alarms go off crazy all over the place. That's what draws fire out. Initially, after the initial cut of the fire alarm, fire comes out to see what's going on. They figure out this woman is cutting the wires, cutting the wires, cutting the wires, cutting the wires. You're going to find out that she was intoxicated, about 2.5 times the legal limit. Drunk. Cutting the wires. You finally figure out, well, I mean, she's damaged all of this stuff. And then there's a response. And you heard that the response was going to be from a couple of SAPD officers at first who start talking to her. As they're talking to her, they're also trying to figure out, what's the damage here? How much does it cost? Because, and what you'll learn is that what you damage in criminal mischief and how much it costs matters. Because the more it costs, the more damage you do to something turns it from a misdemeanor to a felony, and that's important. What they find out is that the damage she did was about $7,500 to cut the alarm system, have it go off for everything. Now, here's the problem with that though. That alarm system, what's it there for? It's there to protect everybody who lives in those apartments. It's there to protect from fire. What the prosecutor didn't tell you is she's in an apartment full of candles that are lit. They don't know what's going on. Yes, they can see her, and they can see a lot of lit candles in there too, and she's cut the fire alarm. But yes, first officers arrive on scene, they talk to her, and they tell her, come here. Because they know that she needs to be detained. They know that she is almost certainly going to be arrested. But they don't want to tell her that. Just like any officer will say, look, hey, just come on over here. Come on to the back of my car. I just need to talk to you back here, talk to you back here. And once they get him in a situation, they can arrest him. It's a de-escalation tactic. What the prosecutor seemed to suggest is that an officer says, hey, come over here so I can put handcuffs on you. That's not smart. They know that. They know that. They know that officers don't do that. So Melissa figured out that that's probably what was about to happen. She was about to get arrested. And so she takes off. Now, evading arrest is not just an arrest. Evading detention is also a charge. So if you were trying to detain someone lawfully, which she just cut the fire alarm stuff, she just done criminal mischief out of a felony amount, her detention was lawful. It was lawful for the officer to say, come here, come to the back of the car, let me detain you. So we know that that was lawful. and then she evaded a lawful detention. She ran away from him. And then you had so a couple of officers. You had Rojas was the original, you had Ramos. So Ramos had gone by that time, and she's running to the apartment, shuts the door behind her, and he starts kicking. And the prosecutor told you, well, I mean, they're kicking her door. The law says absolutely that they can kick her door. Absolutely, they can go in after her. Absolutely, there's no ollie oxen free. There's no home base. You can't go destroy the fire alarm at the apartments, endangering hundreds of lives, potentially. Then be questioned about it, run away from the detention, get to your home and you're safe. That's not how that works. They know that's not how that works. We all know that's not how that works. That's not how the world operates. That's not what happens. That's not what's supposed to happen. Because if that was allowed to happen, we would have no order. We would have nothing but chaos. If we had home base and you could just shut the door and that was it. But that's not what happened. They continued to try to get in. And then you heard about Jonathan Salinas. The way the prosecutor described what was going on with Jonathan Salinas was like, oh, everything's fine, it's okay. Well, Jonathan Salinas is approaching that back window. He is trying to get into the home because they can get into the home. Because it is a felony, right? It's a felony amount. It's a felony this. They could have gotten in anyway because she's evading on foot and she's not allowed to do that. And whatever decisions are being made, like, oh, this person, night CID said, oh, it's all right, write it up later. What you're going to find out is it's a good thing that they didn't in terms of the fact that there was a lot more danger that was going on in there to other people than night CID knew about. They were making decisions blind. They're thinking about cutting the alarm. They're thinking about, well, she's evading arrest. But what they come to find out is that there's another person in that apartment. Now you have a woman who's cut the alarms, who's lit a bunch of candles, and now she has another person in there that they can see and they can talk to. The prosecutor told you, well, they asked him to go open the door. He couldn't because he was bedridden. He was invalid. So now they have to deal with that because you can't leave her alone. What, do they all go home? They all just say, all right, well, I guess not. So they're trying to go and get her, and they had every right to. Because as you heard in voir dire, they have a duty to do that. Why do they have that duty? Why do we ask them to have that duty? Why do we ask them to go to danger when we would all run away from them? Why do we ask them to do that? It's because if you don't go in and make an arrest of a person who is behaving the way Melissa Perez was behaving, then what happens next? Who does she hurt? Does she burn down an apartment complex? Does she kill children? Does she kill babies who were there in that apartment complex? Is it an arson? We don't know. They have to go arrest them. That's why there's a duty. What happens next? Does she go and put that hammer in the head of this guy in the bed? We don't know. They don't know. If it were me or if it were you, we would call the police. But they can't call the police. They have to actually deal with it. They have to go and deal with her. She is acting strangely, sure. She's cutting fire alarms. We know now that she was extremely intoxicated. And then she's running away from the detention, which she can't. So when Salinas is trying to get into that apartment, he's reaching through the window, and you're going to see them do that. Reaching through the window, trying to unlock the door, and she sees him, and she gets that hammer, and she starts to run and swing it at him. And you're going to see on the video that her arm goes outside the window, trying to get him. Salinas draws. The way that they acted was like Salinas was like, oh, no problem. No, he said, you're going to get shot. You're going to get shot. Don't make me do it. You're going to get shot. So, you get Salinas. He's backed out. And this is important. This window, the window that they have there. There's a little patio, as the prosecutor described. You can jump over the patio railing. But this window here has a TV in front of it. But, as the prosecutor told you, after he backs up, she picks up one of those candles, throws it out of that window, and hits Salinas. And what's important about that is that you will see through the evidence in this trial that she was easily able to throw a projectile through that window and injure a police officer. That's important. Projectile, window, police officer. E-tone. It does call all the officers out. But the E-tone was really going out because he says, I got one at gunpoint, because he is going to shoot her. Salinas was going to shoot her if she comes with that hammer again, because this hammer, this is not a small hammer. And she was smaller, but she had done roofing. This is a roofing hammer. And she is swinging it, and she'll swing it as hard as she can. And it doesn't matter if you're 5'1". You're 5'1" and you swing this into somebody's face. You're 5'1" and you swing this into them, you can cause serious bodily injury or death. Everybody knows that. This is a deadly weapon. Every one of their experts is going to say it. Every one of their witnesses is going to say it. They're all going to say this is a deadly weapon. So what is she doing? She is presenting them with a deadly weapon. She is going towards them, trying to get them with this deadly weapon. And they have a right to go home to their families. They have a right not to let this thing hit them in the face. But they also have a duty to not let her just stay there doing whatever she wants to do with the hammer and the candles and the alarms and everything else that's going on. They have a duty to go in, but they have a right to go home. Right? And that's the difference. That's what they're not seeing. All they're seeing is I don't know, should have gone away. But here's the thing. E-tone goes out, that's where these officers come. Alfred comes out, Eleazar comes out, Villalobos comes out. They come out to protect. Villalobos is a Marine. He was. Villalobos, a good man, a good officer, a great officer. You'll see how he behaved, you'll see how he acted, a great officer. An officer who is willing to put himself in the line. An officer who is willing to try to do what he could, do non-violently. The reason he's trying to get that door open, and the prosecutor didn't tell you that either, is when they're talking, she puts the hammer down. And they think, we can get in there while she has the hammer down and basically try to tackle her or just subdue her so that she's away from that weapon. That's why he's trying to open the door. And he reaches in, and he does click the lock. What he doesn't see is there's a lock up top. He thinks that door is unlocked. And I was glad that at least he pointed out that, he put his foot there, not because, no problem, blah, blah, blah. Put his foot there because he did not want that woman coming out of here with that hammer. So he drew his weapon. He was doing what he could to make sure that he went home to his family. The plans that they're making they're trying to do whatever they can to do their duty as police officers. Because if we had police officers, and really, honestly, at the end of this trial, the result of this trial, just wait and see what we live in, right? Just wait and see what kind of community we live in. If we convict these men of murder and aggravated assault, what office, guess what? Burn it down. Whatever you're going to do. Because if I try to do my duty and go in and get you, and then I have to make sure that I go home to my family, I'll be sitting in this chair, that chair, right? It's important. They did the right thing. What the prosecutor tried to tell you is, oh no, it was wrong because they know the pattern. I don't care the pattern. They were right. She was wrong. She cannot.
Your Honor, counsel's getting into what might be closing argument if everything comes in, not laying out what he expects the evidence will show. I would object.
I can rephrase. The evidence will show they were right and she was wrong. The evidence will show this could have killed him. And how do you know? How do you know that it could have? Because when he had his hand reached in there, unlocking the door, she came at him with it. How do you know it was scary? Because you had another Salinas, Maria Salinas, was another officer who was behind him. And she drew her weapon. She was scared. And you'll hear her say, I almost shot her. And the only reason she didn't shoot her was because he was standing in front of her. And she didn't want to shoot him. You'll hear other officers, V, watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out. And he has to get out from the window because she's coming. And what they would say is, well, he should have been in the window. No, he needs to be in the window. That's what his job is to be in the window. His job is to be in the window so we don't have to be. His job is to be in the window so that everybody else can be saved. That's his job. That's what he does. That's what he does. That's what he does. That's their job. And they tried to do what they could. But eventually, they're right. He backs out. They look and formulate different plans. If you remember, counting mule kicks and kicks and kicks, they're not having a whole lot of success over there on that other side. Door. It's a strong door.
15 minutes.
Thank you. It's a strong door. They're not having a lot of success. So they did the final thing that they did, and Nico's about to get up here and talk to you about some of the things individually in that moment and what they would see and how they experienced. But they finally, in that last moment, she is coming with the hammer. They shoot her right here, right under the arm that's got the hammer raised that's going right through that window. You'll see the officers that were in the way. You'll see the officers that could have been hurt. You'll see 4 other officers all draw their weapons. Everybody believes that this is a deadly threat. If this is so weird and crazy, if this is so criminal, if what they did was so criminal, how do 3 people make the exact same decision at the exact same time? They didn't talk about it. It's in a split second. 3 people, exact same. And others behind them would have done it too if they were on the front. So what this trial is going to be about is that those chairs would have been just filled with 3 different people. If the people in the front were in the back and the people in the back were in the front. Because all of them were making that same decision at that same time. That this was a deadly threat that was presented. And then what you're going to see after this is that at first, Detective Soto, who's the lead detective, at first he brings the family in. He shows them the body cam. This is hours later. And he says, look, I mean, she was, just because you have mental problems or anything like that, you could be just as dangerous. And her daughter says, I know. And you're going to hear their daughter say, yes, she's aggressive. She does not like when people question her. The family went in and looked at it, and yeah, and that had to be hard. Detective Soto was in a position at that point hours later, but then all of a sudden something switched. And they filed 3 murder cases. They walked a warrant, which means they walked over and went to a magistrate and filed 3 murder cases against 3 people. You know why there's only 2 murder cases now? They walked that warrant about 10 to 12 hours later after the shooting. They didn't do any investigation at all. Detective Soto went and did a warrant without even seeing or talking to everybody. Something switched. And all of a sudden, they get filed on for murder. You know why there's only 2 murder counts now? It's because they figured out after their investigation that she was only shot twice. One of the officers didn't even shoot her. Right? But he got arrested for murder because their investigation was terrible. It had no basis in reality. It didn't look at any of the evidence that you're supposed to look at when these things happen at all. They didn't even get the benefit that a normal, everyday person would get, which is really all they should get. They didn't get it. So 3 people get arrested for murder. She'd only been shot twice. They didn't overload. They didn't shoot at a time before. They didn't shoot one more time after they heard the word, she's down, she's down. She shot twice. As she was coming at 3 officers with a hammer just like that, they had a right to go home to their families. They have that right. She had no right. No right to go into her home after evading arrest. She had no right to go into her home after cutting the fire alarm. She had no right to stay in that home after hitting Officer Salinas with the candle. She did not have that right. None of us do. They had the right. They did what they had to do to go home to their families. The same thing every officer does, and the same thing every officer promises. And at the end of this trial, you're going to see that all of that is true. And now I'd ask Mr. Wood.
Totality of the circumstances, thank you, Jason. You're going to hear that phrase quite a bit. Officers talk about totality of the circumstances, and I find it interesting that Mr. Harris left a lot of the circumstances out. If you noticed, he was talking very calmly, and I understand that because this was anything but a calm situation. He talked about it as if it was very nonchalant, that people were just talking and then she didn't want them in, as if she had the authority to tell them not to come in. As if they would have gotten a warrant, that would have changed anything. Can we play it out? The evidence will show, and experts are going to testify. And I'm going to say this. Their experts, Mr. Darrell, your experts going to agree with me. Their experts are going to agree with us that if they got a warrant, they would have been in the same situation. Because then they would have breached. It's going to call breach. You're going to hear a term about breach. They would have breached, and the same circumstance would have been there. They would have been in the same situation. There's no requirement to get a warrant when you have probable cause to enter. You're going to hear about 9.32, 9.33, Chapter 14, 38 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. You're going to hear about a lot of law through experts. We have experts. They have experts. I anticipate that some of their experts are going to agree with us on a lot of stuff, because policing is policing is policing. So let's talk about what Mr. Harris conveniently left out. So after you've heard already from Jason that there was a criminal mischief, they can go in. You don't need a warrant for a felony offense. So they went in. They had permission. After Salinas was trying to get in because he could, she came at him. And look, no one's going to swing hard right now, because we don't want to take any chances. I'm going to have a good grip, but I don't want to take a chance. It wasn't, don't come in my property. It was, I'm swinging. I'm going at it. And you're going to see she reached out the window. I'm going to change hands. And she's going at him. And Salinas draws his weapon and says, I'm going to shoot you. And what Mr. Harris didn't tell you, she says, shoot me. I'm going to shoot you. And you're going to hear, shoot me. So that is what we call an aggravated assault against a peace officer. That is a first-degree felony. Someone facing that, you're going to hear, can spend their life in prison. If that same person, you're going to hear during the testimony, accomplishes their feat and hits somebody in the head with this thing, in here, even from a 5'1" lady, and that person and that officer passes away, this table, and remember I mentioned this to Mr. Looney the other day, and he didn't respond to me, they would charge her with capital murder. So an aggravated assault against a peace officer, David, right, is an attempted capital murder. That's what it is. And that was the first one. And she's saying twice. So as you heard counts, that would have been 2 counts of attempted capital murder. 2 counts of attempted capital murder. And then Ms. Salinas backs up. He doesn't have much to go. There's no duty to retreat. He just tactically retreated. You're going to hear about that as well. Then she gets a candle. And the first thought, because I was watching you, and the first thought, people might think, it's just a candle. But a candle can still be a deadly weapon. You break that candle and it cuts you or hits them, it can cause serious bodily injury. And you can defend yourself. That's the 3rd attempted capital murder. Potentially. It's definitely the 3rd aggravated assault against a peace officer. But that was not talked about that way. So this is a dynamic situation. You're going to hear from experts about a continuum of force used. Their experts are going to answer our questions. Our experts are going to answer their questions. People that have been in the department for 40 years, 30 years, detectives that have investigated these situations for this table, when I was in the office, when we were in the office, and for them. They're going to know our witnesses. And they're going to answer questions honestly for you, because they've testified for whomever. They're just here to testify to the truth. That's 3 aggravated assaults. So now she comes after, because Nathan does reach over. He does get there. He doesn't know what's going on with Rojas and Ramos. He doesn't know about the mule kicks. He doesn't know about the front kicks that Mr. Harris was talking about. He just shows up, and there's 15 officers there. Nobody's planning a murder. They're trying to get a woman out of a house that's committed now a criminal mischief felony and 3 aggravated assaults against peace officers, first-degree felony, arguably 2 attempted capital murders. And now they have to extract this woman. And a warrant wouldn't change anything, Mr. Harris, you know that. A warrant wouldn't have changed anything. And then they find out there's an invalid, there's another man there, and then you're going to see in the video, there's going to be a cup of urine, because he can't get out of his bed, he has to pee in a cup. And obviously she's not taking care of him, but you'll be able to decide that yourself. Because he's peeing in a cup. And they have to think about this man after she's cut fire alarms, after she's attempted capital murders, and they don't know what she feels about this guy. They don't know if as soon as they leave to go home, because that's what they're suggesting to you, that she just walks over there, and the man that has to pee in his bed is dead. The man that has to pee in his bed is dead if they don't act, potentially. Experts can talk about that. They can make reasonable assumptions. But the aggravated assaults are not done. Because when Nathan goes in there, because he says, I'm gonna try to unlock the door, because let's try to use less lethal, just try to get her in custody, even though she's committed these aggravated assaults. He goes over and he reaches in after some officers are distracted in the back, you're gonna see, and they say, V, and they're yelling at him, and she comes at him, and it wasn't a trot, Mr. Harris. She's coming at him, you're gonna see it for yourself. And she swings at him, and he barely misses. She barely misses. How do you know that? Because you're gonna hear from Maria Salinas, their witness. You're gonna hear from Vince Gomez, their witness. They're talking about it, man, she barely missed. I mean, that close. If she would have now hit Officer Salinas, and now Nathan, his wife is sleeping by herself, maybe, potentially. His parents don't get to see him for Christmas. Barely. And he reaches back. And because he's a Marine, just because he's not affected the same way other people are, it doesn't mean that he wasn't almost killed. And yes, he does, Mr. Harris. He does this because he doesn't want her coming out that door. Why? Because it's dangerous. You will hear that Travis Thompson, their witness, Robert Ramos, their witness, Jonathan Salinas, their witness, and Maria Salinas, their witness, drew weapons. If that is not a proper draw, Mr. Harris, that's an aggravated assault. You don't have to shoot the gun. You're going to hear witnesses testify that if their claim is that's not a proper, nobody should have drawn their weapons, they're not charged with aggravated assault by a peace officer. Conveniently. Totality to the circumstances. You're going to hear that over and over again. And then so at that point, that is the fourth. Then there's a fifth aggravated assault, potential capital murder. Because Sergeant Flores and Nathan come back over again after discussion. You're going to hear about the 5 C's. I won't bore you with it right now. You're going to be about react plans versus containment plans. You're going to hear about structure and policy. We're going to argue over what policy was and wasn't. Ultimately, policy is not the penal code. Just remember that. But we'll talk about policy. Trust me. We're not going to avoid it. So then as Sergeant Flores, he's not as limber, I'm not being disrespectful as Nathan. He's taking a little more time getting over the rail. She's coming at him and they're yelling at him. Alejandro is sitting there because he's been talking to her the whole time. He sees her coming, he draws his weapon, he fires 5 shots first. This is the first round of volleys. Mr. Harrison, talk about that. And then she runs back and he missed. There's a lot of stress. Our experts are going to testify to the stress of shooting. You're going to hear about a Tooler rule. It's a 21-foot rule that if somebody has a knife within 21 feet or a hammer, that by the time you get your weapon out and put it on your target, someone can reach you within 21 feet of a hammer or a knife and do harm to you. SBI, serious bodily injury, or kill you. She was within 21 feet, by the way, and she's moving fast. And so then Alejandro shoots, she backs up. Now, you're going to hear experts talk about this. If somebody is shot at and they retreat just to regain themselves, and you're going to see, because we're going to stop the video. I mean, she's there, and then she comes again. And then that's when they shot.
8 minutes.
Thank you, sir. And then that's when all 3 of the officers at the same time shot, but other officers drew their weapon, but they couldn't shoot, because you have to know what's in front of you. We'll look at the gun safety rules, and you'll hear about that. And we're just tipping the iceberg, because we're going to dissect all this. And there's going to be things out there that, once again, it's interesting that some of these facts were left out for you. We want you to hear it all. We're not going to object to the sounds and the hearsay on the videos. You're going to see, let it in. They talked about that, right? Let the jury hear about it. We want you to hear about all this stuff. But we're going to ask you to focus on the law. Not policy, the penal code, right? Not your feelings, but facts. We're going to ask for all those things, because in the end, the deceased, unfortunately, this is tragic, I get it. But this same table, which just frustrates me, I'm sorry, because I did what they did, and they would have charged her with capital murder if she would have accomplished her goal of striking any one of these officers. She would be sitting, I wouldn't have represented her, but she would have been sitting at that chair right there. And you would be making the same argument I'm making, right, David? And so now it's up to you. Because we said in jury selection, this is a system of the people, by the people, and for the people. And so we're glad that it's you making this decision, not the government. And we're going to ask you to consider it all the totality of the circumstances. And then the investigation after, as Jason talked about. Why? Why do you walk a warrant in 15 hours? These are not cartel members. They're not going anywhere. And you're going to hear evidence if that's normal in Bexar County, regardless who's DA. Is that normal to walk warrants on officers? When at first it appeared like it was a good shoot, and I'm going to submit to you that it was absolutely a good shoot. So we're going to ask you to consider all that. And whether their expert or their detective, Soto, even looked at all the evidence and whether the government supports a detective walking a warrant, filling out a sworn document, presenting it to a magistrate, and saying, I swear to you these facts are true when they're not true. I wonder if the government supports that. Let me submit to you they shouldn't, because obviously they do. And at the end of this trial, we're going to ask you to come back with a just verdict, a righteous verdict, that these three men are not guilty. Thank you very much.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
May it please the court, counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. One second. One breath. One heartbeat. That's the time that Eleazar Alejandro had to make a decision in this case. Okay? And he had to make that decision because he was faced with a life or death situation. It wasn't his death. It was of his two partners. He was acting in defense of them because the evidence is going to show that he was right on the other side of the railing of that balcony. Okay? And he was acting selflessly to protect his fellow brothers. Okay? And so we want you to consider that. I know that the jury, y'all were talking about how these things can happen in a split second. And from what you've been hearing, you can see that there was some talking going on, but then in a split second, you see Melissa Perez running, and Mr. Harris said running at the window. She wasn't running at the window. She was running at the people at the window. I mean, that's convenient. It's kind of like when they said yesterday, these are excuses. No, it's called justification. Under the law, right? Under the law and under human nature. We all know that's a basic survival instinct, okay? And we all know, just looking at this, anybody can tell you that this is a deadly weapon. I mean, it can kill you, but what you have to remember too is deadly force is not just killing somebody, or causing serious bodily injury, right? Okay? And serious bodily injury can be anything that's capable of causing death, or impairment of a limb, or impairment of an organ. Okay? Now you're going to see in these videos, she gets close to these men's head. What's the biggest organ in your body? Your brain. How about your eyes? Okay? So, no, she was not running at the window like there's some specter there. She was running with bad intentions, Chucky style, okay? Or like a tomahawk with bad intentions. And you're going to see in some of these frames, she's doing this, right? She is, and she's a roofer, okay? And they told you what her size was. She's taller and weighs more than Mr. Alejandro, Officer Alejandro, okay? So she was not a small person, and she knew how to use this, and she knew what she was doing when she picked it up. Now, what was curious in Mr. Harris's opening statement is he mentions nothing about the justification with regard to these men using deadly force. All he talked about was, oh, they really shouldn't have been there. They really shouldn't have been there. Once she asked them to leave and told them they couldn't come in, then they shouldn't have been there. And then when they are trying to follow the law and doing what they're supposed to, prevent injury. When a felony is committed like this, they're going in. Oh, as long as they don't go in and she threatens them, then everything is fine. Now, another thing that you may be wondering, when the police were called, when the fire department was called around 11:30, I think it was engine 36, and it was Lieutenant Hudson who was in charge of the San Antonio Fire Department unit that went out there. He talked to Melissa Perez for like 30 minutes when they got out there. Okay, all the neighbors were out there because they all abandoned the buildings because the fire alarms were all going off. She was getting into arguments with the neighbors, all right? One neighbor even videotaped her. Lieutenant Hudson videotapes her when he's talking to her. And she starts to tell him how she owns the buildings. She's telling the neighbors, I own these buildings, that the FBI is listening to me, and that's why I had to cut the wires. And Lieutenant Hudson says she's very paranoid. So when Officer Riojas, the first officer to go out there, he knows all this. He sees this and what's provided to him. So he's already aware of what's going on, that she's paranoid, that she's psychotic. But when he first gets there and he talks to her, you'll see she was calm with Lieutenant Hudson from the fire department. And for the first minute and a half, when Riojas talks to her, she's calm. She starts to get irritated when Riojas starts to say, do you have mental illness? Are you on medications? And then she starts to get defensive, like it was brought out earlier. Her daughter says, yes, she doesn't like being questioned. Okay? So, at that point, you're going to hear, per the San Antonio Police Department policy manual, and Mr. Harris kept talking about ED. I don't know if you guys know what ED means. It's an emergency detention. Okay? That's when somebody is a danger to themselves or a danger to others. Okay? Now, Officer Riojas, and then when he first starts talking to Melissa and he asks her about cutting the wires, she denies it. She denies she did it. But then Lieutenant Hudson says, come on, tell him what you told me. And so then she admits it. Riojas had probable cause at that time to arrest her for a felony. He did not. He had probable cause to emergency detain her. Mr. Harris keeps talking about, later on after she ran back to her apartment, then Riojas decided maybe he could emergency detain her. There was plenty of the evidence right there for him to emergency detain her. And to emergency detain somebody, you got to cuff them. The thing is, he could have called Ramos and said, hey, get a hold of MedCom, the unit that's in charge of finding a hospital bed for somebody who needs to be emergency detained. He didn't tell anybody about that. Riojas didn't say that. He didn't didn't tell SAPD. He didn't tell Ramos. He could have used. Now he said, well, I didn't want to cuff her because she was aggressive and acting angry. Well, you're going to see she wasn't. But when she was calm, he had 3 big firefighters right there with him. And one of them, the lieutenant, was even saying, hey, I got this video. Oh, he even offered to say, hey, you want to take this as evidence? And Riojas was like, nah, no. And you're going to hear, too, that Riojas and Ramos, this wasn't their district. And you're going to see that they were basically lazy about this whole thing. They didn't like responding to this because it was out of their district. The district was Salinas, who was the 3rd officer to show up. Okay? So, Ramos shows up about 3 minutes after Riojas. And Melissa Perez is there with the firefighters. At that point, Riojas, who still hasn't done anything that he was supposed to do per the manual, and knowing that this woman is clearly a danger to herself and others, you got all the neighbors out there, he doesn't say, hey, let's walk over here with Officer Ramos, and both of them can detain her. Or even before Ramos, he could have called on the San Antonio Fire Department people to detain her. Or he could have called MedCom and say, hey, I need even more backup because I want to detain this person. He didn't do that. Instead, he says, hey, Melissa, follow me. And he starts walking back to his own unit, 35, 40 feet away. when Ramos is over here in the complete other direction. He violates policy because he's letting her walk behind him. Doesn't know what she's doing. Now, once again, this is a woman, a felony, probable cause for a felony arrest, certainly probable cause to be emergency detained. And he gets in his car and he starts to run things on the computer and he says, stand in front of my car. She takes off. And then Ramos says, hey, come back here. So the second officer, Ramos says, hey, come back here. She takes off. Ramos starts walking after her. So it's no surprise that she makes it into her apartment, which is apartment 3102, not 202. She makes it back to her apartment and she closes the door. So then they begin to try to determine, what are we going to do? Okay? And they do talk to some supervisors. And this is going to be interesting. They said Officer Salinas is going to be their first officer. Officer Salinas, when he arrives, remember, this is his district. He's the third officer to show up. They tell you that it was Sergeant Flores okayed the idea to go in to the apartment. Okay? When you see Officer Salinas' initial report, he doesn't say anything about whose idea it was to go into the apartment. Okay? But when they talk to him later on, Salinas says, I told Sergeant Flores, now that I found out that it is a higher amount, and they don't even really know. I mean, it could have been because the guy says, hey, I know it's going to be expensive to replace this entire fire alarm system, which, by the way, had been damaged before, but we'll get into that, the evidence of that. So Salinas says, he calls Flores and he says, hey, now that I found out that it is a felony amount, she's sitting there in the living room. I can go in and get her through the window. It was Salinas' idea. I can go in and get her through the window. And Flores goes, okay, it's a felony, okay. Then these gentlemen say to Salinas, well, that's not in your report. And Salinas even owns it more. He goes, no, it was my idea. So when they tell you, they go back and they tell the other two, it was Sergeant Flores' idea to go in. No, it was Jonathan Salinas' idea to go in. So you had Riojas. None of this would have ever happened if Riojas would have done his job, and their own witnesses are going to tell you that. Their own witnesses are going to tell you that. Okay? And then Travis Thompson, who was also out there, who they say they're going to call as a witness, is going to say, I told these guys, he said, I was going to pull my gun too. She was a danger. She was using deadly force. And he said, and by the way, he said, they kept trying to get me to say, but per the manual, there was no exigent circumstances to go get her. And Thompson said, no, I told them there was. Hot pursuit, which is interesting because yesterday I brought up that Mr. Lunan wasn't using that phrase at all. Hot pursuit, which the United States Supreme Court has recognized as, you see somebody committing a crime, as Mr. Goss said, does it mean they get away with it if they make it to their house? No. Hot pursuit. Officer Thompson says, when I brought up hot pursuit, they didn't want to hear about that. They said, no, look at the manual. Let's not talk about the law. Look at the manual. Okay? Now, Maria Salinas. Earlier, before this even happened, and Eleazar Alejandro, you're going to see, is a fine man. He's a veteran. He's going to be a father. His wife is a police officer. She's expecting. Right before this, he and Maria Salinas are out and doing their thing in their district, and there's some guy walking on the street because he'd just been kicked out of his house, and he's like, my girlfriend's mad at me, and I think her brothers are going to come over, and he said, I don't have a place to go. He wasn't in touch or anything. He was just out on the street, and Alejandro says, well, get in the car. He said, I can't drive you to your mom's house, who's in the northeast part of town, but I can take you to a store. And he takes him over there, and he gets on the phone and is talking to this guy's mother in Spanish. And then he says, hey, look, I can't stick around with you because the E-tone came out. He said, there's an officer in trouble. I got to go. Okay? So Alejandro takes off. Maria Salinas has already taken off. When Alejandro gets there, you've heard about all this time, he is there for 12 minutes. 12 minutes before this shooting happens. And you're going to see He was only there for 12 minutes. Once again, an hour and a half before, if Riojas had done his job, this wouldn't have happened. Oh, I didn't even say Ramos, who they're calling as a witness. This is really interesting. Riojas, Ramos, and Salinas still all have their jobs. You're going to see on the evidence is going to show Ramos, fine officer, he does, among other things, he starts to say to Melissa Perez, she's wearing a bandana, what are you, a gang member? When he's talking to her and she's inside her house. And then he starts to use his taser to threaten to tase her dog. I'm going to tase your dog. Okay? And then he starts to say, you know, are you a gang member? What are you on? And then he's flashing his flashlight in the living room where she is, and she starts to flash a flashlight back. And he says, mine's bigger. And then he turns to a buddy and he says, you got to find your fun where you can get it. Okay? Now, one thing I forgot to say, Salinas knew from prior experience that Melissa Perez had mental issues. Neither Salinas, Ramos, or Riojas ever told Sergeant Flores about that. And then remember, Riojas didn't do his job in the first place because he didn't ED or arrest her immediately, and none of this would have happened. And throughout all of this, none of these people, none of these other officers ever told Sergeant Flores or these other gentlemen about what her condition was. As a matter of fact, when you watch the videos, those two are moseying off in the corners. They're not anywhere to be found. It's these three who show up, and they showed up because an officer was in trouble, right? I got one at gunpoint. Salinas pulls his gun on her. I'm going to shoot you. Shoot me, right? Then the E-tone goes out. So when Mr. Harris said that she thrown the candle before, no. She threw the candle out the window and hit him after the E-tone occurred. So the E-tone was for Salinas having somebody at gunpoint. Then she throws the candle out and hits him. Now, you're also going to hear from the experts. Their experts, from the medical examiner, from their lead detective, Soto, and he's quite the trip. They walked warrants in 16 hours. There is no way that guy looked at every single body camera or all the evidence in this case. When you look at his affidavits for the warrants of arrest, a lot of the significant information is missing. Now, what you're going to find out is within 16 hours of their arrest, who was in on the decision to arrest these guys within 16 hours? These people over here. They worked in tandem with the SAPD administration to walk warrants on these three public servants within 16 hours without looking at all of the evidence. And you're going to see in Soto's affidavit, it is replete with missing information. And then, you know, a lot of these people were afraid to talk to us. We just talked to Thompson yesterday, and he's the one who says, yeah, they didn't want to hear about hot pursuit. And these guys are going to tell you they had the right to go in, and deadly force was appropriate. This was a tragedy. There's no question about it. Okay? There is no question about it. This is one of those cases where it's a choice between the horrible and the terrible. All right? But these men didn't wake up that morning, and when they put their clothes on and put their badge on and left their families, decided, you know what? I'm going to go get somebody tonight. You'll see that they were out there to help. Alejandro is a hostage negotiator. He was actually, about to, number one on the list to make the SWAT team. And you can even hear him later. He said, well, now that I've been involved in a shooting, everybody knows they get put on administrative leave. There go my chances to get on SWAT. Okay? So he knew when he acted selflessly, because his life wasn't in danger, he was doing the right thing. And remember what we talked about yesterday, the duty to prevent injury isn't just to other people, it was also to Melissa Perez. You're going to see in the 12 minutes when Alejandro's there, he is trying to talk her down. And she says, you need a warrant, you don't got a warrant. And he's like, well, if we went and got a warrant, would that be, okay or whatever? And she's like, no, a warrant for what? There was nothing. She committed multiple felonies, but she doesn't know what the warrants are for. Okay? She's psychotic. And remember yesterday, Mr. Lunan, when he was talking about defensive property, how you have the right to use force to defend your property. What was the main thing about it? It's got to be reasonable, right? It's got to be reasonable. I think those are contradictions in terms. For somebody in the midst of a psychotic episode to be found acting reasonably. Now, when they talk about Santos de la Rosa, that's the invalid man that was in that apartment. No one knows anything about him. No one. He died within a month. SAPD took a statement from him that's maybe 5 or 6 lines long. The chief of police who was there at the scene and gave a press conference didn't even know he was in the apartment. Okay? Alejandro, who's a hostage negotiator, says when somebody says there's this invalid man in this bed with a glass of urine right next to it with all these burning candles, he's like, we got to go in now. Right? You don't know what this woman's going to, you think all the other neighbors are going to be comfortable with SAPD just saying, you know what, we're out of here, you're on your own, and that man's on his own. And Mr. Harris talked about her family, that she had all these extra bedrooms because the family was the light of her life and she had all these kids. The evidence is going to show her children were all taken from her. Okay? And you're going to hear evidence why. Because of her psychoses, because of other issues that we'll get into. And you're going to hear about multiple acts of aggression because of that. All right? So for them to say, oh, and he has no idea, he said she had a guess. They have absolutely no idea who this man was. They didn't even know where he went after they released him that night. Okay? So, did you want to address? Okay. The last thing I want to say is, before Mr. Cifuentes comes up here for the last 5 minutes of the time I took from him, that the law permits any human being, not just these people, to stop a threat before they're stopped by the threat. Okay? So we're asking you to keep that in mind when you listen to all the evidence in this case. Thank you very much.
I want to focus at a critical point in time. You'll see it, we'll show you in the videos, we'll play it in slow-mo, we'll play it regular speed, we'll play it frame by frame, however you want to look at it. What you're going to see is the critical moment in time is at 2:02:04. 2:02:04. This is when Alejandro is at the rail, and actually he's probably this close to the window, the patio window that I'm in front of the juror right now, because it's a 6-foot width patio. All of our counsel have been demonstrating probably 3 times the distance when they've backed up. But there's no ability to back up because of the railing. And so when Alfred Flores goes over the railing, he goes over counterclockwise, and he's like this. The back of his head is to the window. And we know that because his body camera is facing away from the window. Sergeant Edwin Rivera is over here, and his line of sight is into the head of Alfred Flores, and the window where at 2:02:07, Melissa Perez swings the hammer and she braces herself against the opening of the window and hits the window at 2:02:07. When she hits the window at 2:02:07, the back of Alfred Flores' head is probably 3 to 5 feet away from that window. So Eleazar Alejandro said he fired because he feared that Melissa Perez was going to throw that hammer through the window. And we told you about apparent danger and reasonable danger. And if he reasonably believed that the hammer was going to be thrown through that window at a distance of 3 to 5 feet away, you can see why he reasonably feared this hammer was going to kill his sergeant. And he fired 5 times. He missed. When she charged at the window and swung, and what they didn't tell you is there's 5 or 6 body cameras that captured the red handle. Dallin Young could see, he couldn't see it, but the shield that he had showed through the glass that the hammer was being swung. Travis Thompson had a critical window, video, that nobody looked at until November 6th, 5 months after the arrest warrant, a couple of months after Soto submitted the report to the chief of police. The chief of police signed off on it, pencil whipped it, never looked at any videos. The command staff never looked at any videos. They didn't look at Travis Thompson's video, which clearly shows Melissa Perez swinging the hammer, hitting the window at 2:02:07. And Alfred Flores' head was 3 to 5 feet away from that hammer. Melissa Perez returned into the interior of her apartment, and then she looked at the patio window, was having her hammer, lunged forward and ran and closed the distance in a short period of time, and that's when the second volley was fired. This is information that the prosecution left out. This is information that was falsified in the affidavit, and we'll get into that in greater detail.